For additional answers, we turn to Michael Sarian, a Seattle-based researcher with expertise in lost civilizations and technologies. As a renowned author for publications addressing several lost keys to understanding our ancient history, Michael Sarian is also the producer of Origins and Oracles, a popular series that explores the mysteries of our ancient past.
It's the hubris of every civilization to believe that they are the custodians of all knowledge. It's just a normal, symptom of human hubris, the human mind. But when a person who is rational, very rational person looks back to the past, the Baalbek stone in Egypt, to this day, cannot be moved by cranes. Blocks that were involved in the building of the pyramid, the actual individual blocks, some of them are impossible to move. We don't even have cranes today that can move them. You can build a wall around the city, from the whole of the country of France, 3 meters high and 1 meter thick, with the blocks that it took to build, the pyramid. You can build 30 Empire State Buildings out of the pyramid. They're finding edifices bigger than the pyramid in China. The Agora complex in Cambodia, which is perfectly aligned to the stars, to Draco, the constellation Draco, where the little shrines and temples, and Graham Hancock and others have shown this. There are so many anomalies all over the world, the crystal skull, the list is pretty endless of proving that there was something going on. It's not that the evidence is lacking. I mean, Graham Hancock and others are putting on diver suits and going down and filming it for you. There they are. There are these underground cities. So it's not that the evidence is lacking. It's that the receptivity and the tendency to be humble enough to accept that we are not the supreme in our little cyber age. We have not got all the answers and all the science. And there's always new evidence coming out. I mean, people can go and see these the Somerset Zodiac. They can look at that in England. They can look at the Cyclopean ruins all over the world. Now that Russia, we have post-perestroika, there's been archaeologists going in there and discovering incredible ruins of enormous size, in Siberia even. Anomalies in the Arctic also are very intriguing. And then when you go up into the Arctic region, you find evidence of civilization there. Perhaps there was a tholiiform axis of the Earth. Tholiiform means without tilt. Scientists have spoken about that. That's a very great possibility, because in northern climes, underneath all of that ice in the Arctic, underneath the ice of Greenland, is evidence of civilization, is evidence of temperate climate, what used to be known in Latin as the verve perpetuum, which is the eternal spring, in which life was longer, human life was longer, animals were not as carnivorous, vegetation was opulent throughout the world. So this disturbance that came either shattered certain continents that were here, or literally tilted and skewed the Earth tectonic system, so that water overcame and washed out the evidence of previous civilizations, leaving barren areas, desert areas that have subsequently been inhabited. Not because the people wanted to inhabit those regions. I mean, the new equator, which would now have been near Mesopotamia, is not a particularly hospitable place. There's very little iron ore there. In fact, the ingredients for the elements of civilization are lacking. And this is very important. When these civilizations were arising, they happened to be arising in a place where the ingredients for civilization are very sparse. Very little gold, very little iron, very little water. Certain places in Persia, even animals can't survive. Now, why would human beings of their own accord, you see, without some very important reason, set up civilizations in these barren wildernesses? What happened to these continents that their own legends are saying once existed? And in that scenario, what we're seeing is that there was a polar shift which displaced the continents and probably sank many. There's water evidence around the Sphinx and the pyramid, you see, that betrays this. We're looking into the fossil record. For instance, Richard Milton has basically set himself the task of rewriting the whole of Darwinism based on these discoveries of the fossil record, dating to about 13,500 years ago. But Allen and Dallaire and others are absolutely convinced we cannot accept that the Earth's axial tilt has always been the same that it is. What we're reading in these ancient legends is that they're talking about the shifting of the polar axis. And that would be the kind of event that, in my reading of all of this, would precipitate the extinction rate that we're talking about scientifically when we look at that. Our planet has been visited many times by celestial bodies and celestial events that have been causing catastrophe. And it's certainly written into the race memory of people to talk about the dragons and the serpents careering through, which would be comets in the modern parlance. But the power of the dragon, just like you see the Chinese doing their dragon dances with all the sparking and flying and fireworks. These are old remnants, old relics of the time when the sky was on fire and when the planets seemed to be moving out of their orbits and so on. The ancients did have a advanced technology, probably even further in advance of where we are now. So we have questions about this kind of technology. We've all heard of the Greek fire, of course, which is one of the most famous anecdotes of the past. And we have many, Smithsonian Institute talks about that 7,000 years ago steel was being made in furnaces. So we're having officialdom make claims and understand that we're finding very, very pure forms of gold, for instance, very pure forms of glass. And we can reread a lot of this science now. What is the great famous cauldron of the Celts that when dead heroes or dying, wounded heroes are put in, they come out alive? You know, is that similar to our cryogenic chambers today? The king who has a metal arm made for himself. We're talking 5,000 years BC, and the king who has his arm cut off in battle, the physician comes along and constructs what is known as a silver arm. And the king of the Celts is called from that day Nada of the silver arm. Are we talking cybernetics? We happen to be at a very important age where we can now look back. You couldn't really do this in the 17th and 1800s, you see, and possibly even in the early 19th century. You couldn't reread the myths properly. We're now in the 21st century. We have some of the technologies that used to exist. So we're actually on a very fortunate pedestal of history where we can look back at these ancient myths and reevaluate them and reappraise them. So what do we do when we hear a passage like this from Celtic mythology? And I'll just read it. They're talking about Lu. And he had a magic spear, which he had no need to wield himself, for it was alive and thirsted for blood. When battle was near, it was drawn out. Then it raved and roared and struggled against its thongs. Fire flashed from it. It tore through and through the ranks of the enemy, never tired of slaying. So Lu suddenly has this spear that does its own thing. Is that not like the heat-seeking weapons that we have today? In Celtic legend, they say that Lu used to warn his fellows not to go near this weapon because if they did, their fingernails and their hair would fall out. It's a verbatim from the ancient legends. Almost exactly the same as the warnings that are given about the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible.
Sounds radioactive.
Sounds radioactive. They've now discovered that the corpses at Mohenjo-Daro in India are radioactive. Taking it all into consideration, if there was any kind of cataclysm, you know, water, volcanism, pole shift, etc., careering comet, which is, of course, a lot of people are speculating, we are probably, of all civilizations of the past, the most vulnerable. We would immediately be traumatized.
We began the Horizon Project by looking into our past, rediscovering a history that is far different than any of us could have imagined, coming face to face with the horrific fate that many ancient civilizations endured. But decoding our past leads to an inevitable question. Is humanity destined to relive these horrors? Are the prophecies and warnings real? Is the end of the world really just over the horizon? One man seemed to believe so, one of the most well-known and respected scientists in modern history, Albert Einstein.
One can hardly doubt that significant shifts of the crust have taken place repeatedly and within a short time. In the polar region, there is a continual deposition of ice, which is not symmetrically distributed about the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way will, when it has reached a certain point, produce a movement of the Earth's crust over the rest of the Earth's body, and this will displace the polar regions toward the equator.